Happy New Year, everyone, from all of us here at Canadian HR Reporter. We're looking forward to 2014, and we've identified the news stories that will most likely have the greatest impact on the HR profession this year. I brought Canadian HR Reporter's editors into the studio to fill me in on what those stories are and why you should know about them. First up is our managing editor, Todd Humber, who says one of last year's biggest stories will continue to make news this year. Bill 32, the Registered Human Resources Professionals Association Act, became law in Ontario. And now, after two previously unsuccessful bills, the HRPA has more power when it comes to investigating wrongdoing and greater ability to protect the misuse of its professional designations.
When we look back on Bill 32 years from now, I think we'll view it as a win for the HR profession across Canada. Yes, it's Ontario law that only covers HR professionals who are members of the HRPA, but it was a giant pat on the back for all HR professionals and recognition that HR is truly a profession. There is still a lot of work to be done by the HRPA when it comes to enacting bylaws, and that will be a story we watch closely in 2014. There will be growing pains, no doubt, but I suspect other provinces, particularly BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan, will soon be pushing for similar legislation from their politicians.
Whether it's Occupy Wall Street or million-dollar severance payments for departing CEOs, there seems to be mounting concern around high levels of executive compensation. Sarah Dobson, senior editor with Canadian HR Reporter, says organizations, and HR, will be watching just how large the checks are that are being written out to Canadian CEOs in 2014.
So these past few years, we've seen Say on Pay become a much bigger trend, with shareholders looking to have greater input on leadership compensation. And a newer trend that's emerging are pay ratios, and that's where executive pay is measured against the average employee's pay, as was introduced down in the United States. More recently, in Ontario, for example, there was legislation introduced looking to cap public sector pay. So going forward, HR may be looking more closely at the optics around executive compensation.
Expanding the Canada Pension Plan was an ongoing debate in 2013. Several provinces put pressure on the federal government to take action. And when provincial and federal ministers of finance met in December, the CPP issue dominated the debate. Liz Bernier, news editor with Canadian HR Reporter, says there are many components that make this story an interesting one for 2014.
Many of the provinces, led by Ontario and Prince Edward Island, want the federal government to increase the CPP premiums that employers and employees pay. Some employer groups, like the CFIB, are strongly opposing that. Federal Finance Minister Jim Flaherty has flatly refused to expand the CPP at this point, saying it doesn't make sense when the global economy is still fragile. The federal government said an expanded CPP would amount to a job-discouraging payroll tax. One interesting development to watch will be how Ontario moves forward on its vow to create an Ontario pension plan, and whether any other provinces will follow suit.